For 30 years, this man taught evolution. He championed science, ridiculed faith, and believed we were merely evolved matter. He was right about the body, but he was fundamentally wrong about your conscience. What the alien showed wasn't about bones or cells, it was about the origin of yourself. He revealed that while our physical body followed Darwin's rules, our essence, that which makes us unique, came from a place that predates the earth. Itself. So, you're about to discover the truth that modern science ignores and that religion has distorted. A truth that proves our origin is far more divine, but also far more complex than either side of the debate admits. The question is, what do you do when you discover that your body is from Earth, but your soul is from another place? Science says we come from matter. Religion says we come from the soul. But what happens if both are right, yet incomplete? In this video, you will discover the secret dossier on the dual origin of humanity, the reason why our brains evolved on Earth, but our consciousness came from another dimension. Don't take your eyes off the screen, because by the end of this video, you will receive the answer to those feelings of not belonging that you have carried your whole life and learn the true purpose your soul chose when coming to this world. What will be revealed now will completely transform your understanding of evolution, of consciousness, and of who you really are. Dr. Richard Coleman was 58 years old and absolutely convinced of three things. First, Darwinian evolution perfectly explained human origins. Second, consciousness was a product of the brain, not something separate from it. Third, any talk of a soul or spiritual dimensions was primitive superstition that science had already refuted. He had defended these positions publicly for 30 years, teaching evolutionary biology at the University of Colorado in Boulder, debating creationists dozens of times, always winning with data, fossils, genetics, and irrefutable evidence. But 3 months ago, something had happened that shook the foundations of those certainties. Not publicly because Rick would never admit it, but internally, deeply. His 17-year-old daughter, Sarah, had suffered a serious car accident, cardiac arrest, for 4 minutes, clinically dead. The medical team managed to resuscitate her, and when she woke up days later, she described an impossible experience. She left her body floated above the operating room, saw doctors working on her from an angle she couldn't have seen, otherwise described specific instruments they used, conversations. They had details that she later verified and were correct. Rick, a rigorous scientist, tried to rationalize the situation. Hallucinations caused by cerebral hypoxia. False memories constructed after waking up, any materialistic explanation. But the explanations didn't quite hold up. The details Sarah knew were too specific, too verifiable. And for the first time in 3 decades of scientific career, Rick was secretly questioning, what if consciousness isn't just a product of the brain? What if it could exist independently of it? But he wouldn't admit it to anyone. His academic reputation was at stake. Colleagues would ridicule him. Then came sleepless nights researching near-death experiences, studies on reincarnation literature he had previously dismissed as pseudoscience, in a growing conflict. His scientific mind said one thing, his now awakened intuition said another. And on that particular night, a Friday in March at 10:40 p.m., Rick was driving alone on a mountain road returning from a scientific conference where he had presented a paper defending purely materialistic evolution. And he was thinking precisely about that. How do I reconcile what I know about evolution with what Sarah experienced? And then light appeared. Not car headlights, but an intense cylinder of bluish-white light descending from the sky directly onto his vehicle. And the car stopped instantly. Engine dead, lights off. Rick tried to start it again, but nothing happened. And then he felt not physically, but energetically a presence, something intelligent watching, and a beam of light enveloped him through the windshield, and his body gently froze without pain, but immobile, and began to levitate, exiting the car through a roof that temporarily dissolved. And Rick, even in a panic, the scientific part of him observing, this isn't possible. I'm hallucinating. I must have crashed the car and I'm unconscious. But the sensation was viscerally real. It ascended through the light toward an object suspended silently, perhaps 100 meters above the road. A craft not like those shown in films, but almost organic, its surface resembling liquid metal reflecting starlight. It passed through an opening in its base, carefully deposited into a circular, silvery white chamber. The floor was warm beneath its feet, but not burning its walls, subtly pulsating with a vibrant texture. In the center of the chamber, near the already activated holographic console displaying a three-dimensional image of the Earth, slowly rotating, was the being tomb in tall, smooth pale gray, skin, a large oval head, immense black eyes with no visible pupils. But Rick sensed profound intelligence observing through them. A slender but not fragile body, long fingers, and his presence was neutral. Not threatening, but also not comforting, merely observant, almost scientific. And before Rick could form a complete thought, a voice came, not audible, but telepathic, directly into his mind. Richard Coleman, professor of evolutionary biology, 30 years defending Darwin, a staunch atheist who teaches consciousness as emerging from the brain, but recently questioning after his daughter experienced out-of-body consciousness during clinical death. An internal conflict between what he teaches and what intuition now suggests. I have come to answer the question, you don't speak aloud but scream internally. Where does consciousness come from, Rick? Shocked that the alien knew his private thoughts, tried to rationalize telepathically. This isn't real. I'm having a psychotic episode, stress from Sarah's accident. And the alien, without facial expression, but Rick sensed something like compassion or patience, replied, "It's not psychosis, Richard. It's an experience that the materialistic mind interprets as impossible because the paradigm you carry doesn't include this reality. But I will prove it's real by showing you something that no scientific book has taught you. But that will explain both what you study and what your daughter experienced. And in the process, I will answer the question in the title that brought you to this moment. Did humans come from monkeys? Yes and no. Both true. They explain different levels. Rick, confused, asked, how can it be yes and no? And the alien touched his shoulder, not physically threatening, but energetically potent. And Rick felt a wave of profound peace, absolute mental clarity, as if a fey that had covered his consciousness for decades had instantly dissipated. And he knew, not rationally, but viscerally, this is real, I'm not hallucinating. And the alien said, the frequency of this ship raises consciousness, allows it to process information that the mind in a normal beta state rejects. Now you are ready to see. I will show you evolution like you've never seen before. Not because it was wrong, but because it was incomplete. You taught half the story. I will show you the other half that materialistic science systematically ignores. The holographic console in the center of the chamber shone more intensely. The image of Earth dissolving, replaced by a new projection beginning to form. And the alien said, first you will see what you already know, the physical evolution of the human body, 4 billion years compressed into minutes. And I will confirm. Darwin was right, and then I will show you what you don't know, the origin that precedes the body, and you will understand why the answer to where did we come from requires looking in two directions simultaneously, down into matter and up into consciousness, ready, still processing the impossibility of the situation, but with scientific curiosity overcoming fear. Telepathically nodded, show me. And a holographic projection exploded into life around him, three-dimensional immersive. And Rick was no longer just observing, but inside had the visualization of witness traversing time, and was about to see evolution in a way that 30 years of academic teaching never showed. Not because the data was wrong, but because the context was fatally incomplete. A holographic projection completely enveloped Rick. He was no longer in the ship's chamber, but submerged in a primordial ocean. Dark water all around, and he could feel the temperature and pressure, not physically but consciously. A total immersive experience. The alien narrated telepathically as time accelerated. 4 billion years ago, young Earth oceans covered in organic compounds, and here a bright light in the dark water. First life, a single cell replicating itself, the beginning of everything. And time compressed, millions of years passing in seconds. Rick saw an explosion of single-celled life, then multi-celled life, complex organisms emerging, and suddenly he was under a clearer ocean's sunlight penetrating, and around him primitive fish, jawless, then jawed, evolving at an accelerated pace. And the alien said, 500 million years ago, Cambrian explosion, massive diversification ancestors of everything that breathes today, including your lineage. The scene changed drastically. Rick was now in a shallow swamp, amphibious creatures crawling from the water to land. First hesitant, then confident, lungs developing, legs strengthening. And the alien narrated 350 million years. Vertebrates conquering dry land. Your ancestors multiple generations ago. Every evolutionary step preserved in fossils you studied, Richard. Everything you taught for 30 years is here, real documented. And Rick, even knowing all that, intellectually seeing it viscerally was different, exciting a validation of his entire career. And time continued to accelerate. Reptiles dominating, then small mammals emerging, surviving the extinction of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. And the focus changed. A specific lineage, now primitive primates and trees, then on the ground. And the alien said, 7 million years ago, here common ancestor between your species and modern chimpanzees. The moment when lineages separated. The projection showed a small furry creature, partly in trees, partly on the ground, and Rick recognized it from fossil reconstructions. And then the human lineage unfolded rapidly. Orlopithecus walking upright, but still primitive. Then Homo habilis using simple stone tools. And Rick saw evolution not as pictures in a book, but as a living process, each generation slightly different from the previous one. Natural selection visibly operating. Adaptation to environments gradually changing. Anatomy. Homo erectus appeared taller with a larger brain. Mastering fire. Migrating from Africa. And the alien paused here. 2 million years ago. This ancestor of yours spread across continents, adapted to diverse climates. Its brain grew from 900 centimeters to 1/100. Its use of tools became more sophisticated, and the telepathic voice grew more intense. Observe something crucial that is coming. Time progressed. Various Homo species coexisted. Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Asia, and then 300,000 years ago, the projections slowed dramatically. And Rick saw Homo sapiens appearing in East Africa. And the alien said, here, Richard, is your species' anatomically modern brain of 1/400 centimeter physical structure ready. The projection showed early Homo sapiens hunting, gathering, living in small groups. And Rick observed that physically, they were no different from modern humans. Identical bone structure, equal body proportions. And the alien continued, evolution of the body completed here. Everything you have seen up to this point is what you teach. Natural selection, random mutations that confer reproductive advantage, adaptation to environments, gradual, slow, 4 billion years of refinement. Rick felt profound validation, but he also confusion. So evolution explains everything. Why am I here? And the alien replied, evolution explains the body perfectly. Darwin wasn't wrong. You share 98.8% of your DNA with chimpanzees because you share a common ancestor. The body evolved on Earth following natural laws that science describes correctly. In this, your 30 years of work are impeccable, and a significant pause. The body is only half the story. The projection changed. Now showing side by side two Homo sapiens from 300,000 years ago, physically identical in appearance. But the alien pointed out this one, the figure on the left, operates on pure instinct, eats, reproduces, survives. No different from ancestral primates in essential behavior. But this one, the figure on the right, does something impossible for an animal. Buries the dead with flowers, paints, and caves, questions, stars, seeks meaning, feels that there is something beyond survival. Rick looked at the difference. So what changed between them? Anatomy is the same. And the alien replied, anatomy is the same because both evolved from the same biological process, but behavior is radically different. And here's a question that materialistic science doesn't adequately answer. Where does self-awareness come from? Existential questioning, spiritual drive. It's not just brain size. Elephants and whales have larger brains than humans, but they don't make art. They don't bury the dead ritually. They don't seek God. And the projection changed again, showing a clear timeline. 4 billion years of physical evolution in a horizontal line below. And the alien said, this line you teach, it's solid, real, proven by fossils and genetics. But in a second line appeared above, shining golden with no apparent connection to the line below. This line science ignores not because it doesn't exist, but because materialistic instruments don't measure it. And this line explains what happened 300,000 years ago that transformed anatomically modern primates into humans who question their own existence. Rick looked at the second line, what is this? And the alien replied, origin of consciousness, not from the brain, but through the brain. And I'm going to show you something that neuroscience can't explain, but your daughter's experience proved. Consciousness is not generated by the brain, it is received by it. The brain is an interface, not a source. And the consciousness that inhabits the human body did not evolve from primates. It came from somewhere else entirely. It existed before Earth had life and chose to incarnate when the biological vehicle was ready. Rick felt his mind resisting decades of scientific materialism. That's dualism, an old philosophy that neuroscience has refuted. Consciousness emerges from complex neural processes, not a separate entity, an alien patient. Then explain how your daughter had expanded consciousness when her brain was clinically dead with no electrical activity. If consciousness emerges from neurons, it should cease when neurons stop. But it continued. She saw, heard, processed information. How Rick had no answer. This had been bothering him for 3 months. The alien said, I will show you the dimension from which consciousness comes. A plane that exists parallel to this one, but at a frequency that physical instruments cannot detect. And I will show you the exact moment when the first consciousnesses of this plane chose to descend and inhabit bodies that evolved here. A fusion between two journeys, physical and spiritual. And when you see it, you will understand why the answer to where we came from is not evolution or spiritual creation. It is both operating at different levels. The body evolved consciousness incarnated, and together they created a complete human. And the projection began to change. The upper golden line expanding, showing a dimension Rick had never imagined existed. And the alien said, prepare yourself. What you will see now is not in any biology book, but it explains everything that biology alone cannot. It explains sudden cave arterary rituals, self-awareness, spirituality, and it explains why your daughter left her body and remained conscious. Because consciousness is not of this plane, it only visits temporarily. Ready, a way holographic projection had completely changed. No longer scenes of physical evolution, but something impossible to categorize. Rick was looking at a space that wasn't space, a vibrant golden light with no specific source. It had no floor, ceiling, or walls, just an infinite expanse of pulsating luminosity that seemed alive, conscious, and within that light, millions, no billions, of smaller luminous points, each shining at a unique frequency, moving, interacting, temporarily merging and separating. A cosmic dance of lights that Rick couldn't comprehend, but felt had profound meaning. Alien narrated telepathically. This is a higher dimension, what some traditions call the spiritual plane, the fifth dimension, heaven, nirvana. Different names for the same reality. A frequency of existence where dense matter does not exist, only pure consciousness. And each point of light you see is individual consciousness. A being that thinks, feels, chooses, learns, but without a physical body. Rick, a scientific mind trying to process. Where does this exist? On another planet, another galaxy? And the alien replied, not where in the spatial sense here, now occupying the same place as Earth, but at a different frequency. Like different radio waves occupy the same space without interfering. This dimension coexists with the physical dimension, but in vibration that material instruments do not detect. Therefore, the science you practice does not measure it, not because it does not exist, but because it searches in the wrong spectrum. The projection showed a timeline not of Earth, but of this dimension. And the alien said, this dimension has existed since before Earth had life. Consciousnesses evolve here for eons, not through natural selection, but through choices, experiences, learnings. Each consciousness begins simple, grows in complexity, wisdom, love throughout countless cycles. Rick saw projected consciousnesses interacting, some shining more intensely than others, some merging into groups, others exploring individually. And the alien continued. Evolution happens here too, but differently, not physically, but spiritually. Not through competition for resources, but through expansion of understanding. And when consciousnesses reach a certain level, they seek more intense experiences, greater challenges, and planets with physical life become schools. And the projection shifted, showing Earth 300,000 years ago, the physical timeline Rick had seen before. Newly emerged Homo sapiens, large brain-capable body, and the alien pointed here. Crucial moment. The human body has evolved sufficiently. Brain with 1/400 cubic centimeters complex nervous system structure, capable of serving as a vehicle for dimensional consciousnesses. Until then, primates operated by instinct, intelligent but limited, and then golden light descending from the higher dimension to Earth. The first consciousnesses chose to incarnate. Rick saw in an immersive projection consciousnesses descending from the golden light entering the bodies of Homo sapiens. And the moment they entered, their behavior changed drastically. Primates that previously only hunted and ate now paused, gazing at the starry sky, questioning. Primates that previously ignored the dead now buried them with flowers and tools, preparing for the journey that animal instinct could not conceive. Alien explained when dimensional consciousness inhabits a physical body, it brings with it memories of origin, not conscious memory, because incarnation requires forgetting for the experience to be genuine but deep subconscious memory. An intuition that there is more than matter and impulse to seek transcendence, to create art, to explore meaning. This doesn't come from DNA. It comes from the inhabitant of the body, a consciousness that knows it is more than flesh. Rick resisted, but neuroscience shows that consciousness is entirely dependent on the brain. Brain damage changes personality. Alzheimer's destroys memories. How do you explain that if consciousness is separate? And the alien replied, I'll show you through your daughter's experience clearer than any argument. The projection shifted. Rick recognized the scene immediately. The operating room 3 months ago. Sarah in the center, the medical team around her working frantically, monitors showing a flat line, cardiac arrest, and Rick saw what Sarah had described, a point of light emanating from her body floating above, observing, and the alien narrated her brain, dead, no electrical activity, but consciousness present, lucid, more lucid than ever, according to her account. She saw doctors from an impossible angle, heard conversations, processed everything. How Rick had no answer that satisfied materialism. And the alien continued. Because consciousness wasn't in the brain, it was through the brain. The brain is an interface that connects consciousness to the body, not a generator of consciousness. When the interface fails, consciousness doesn't cease. It just disconnects. And without the brain's filter limiting perception to physical survival, consciousness expands, sees more. not less. The projection showed Sarah returning to her body as her heart restarted. Light entering again, reconnecting. And the alien said she returned because it wasn't time to leave her body permanently. Lesson not completed. But she briefly experienced what everyone experiences in death, returning to the dimension of origin. And that changed her, right? She lost her fear of death, gained certainty of continuity. Rick nodded telepathically. Sarah had truly changed, more serene, less materialistic, and the alien said, "And you've changed too, Richard. You've shattered the certainty that consciousness is just the brain. That's why you're here, because your soul demanded an answer even if your scientific ego resists. A deep part of you wants to understand, and I'll complete the explanation now." The projection again showed two parallel lines, physical below, spiritual above. And the alien narrated physical journey, 4 billion years, single-celled life, evolving into Homo sapiens. Body prepared through natural selection. Slow, gradual, totally material process. Spiritual journey, eons in a higher dimension. Consciousnesses evolving through choices and experiences. Existing before Earth had primates. When the body was ready, 300,000 years ago, consciousnesses descended, incarnated fusion occurred, and the lines connected at a point 300,000 years ago. And the alien said, humanity is the meeting of these journeys. A body that evolved meets a consciousness that incarnated. Together they create a unique experience. A spiritual being having a material existence, using a temporary biological vehicle to learn lessons that only physical density teaches. Pain separation. Death concepts non-existent in a higher dimension, but essential for accelerated growth. Rick processed that, decades of materialistic paradigm cracking. So we didn't come from monkeys because consciousness didn't evolve from animals, but the body shares ancestry with primates, and the alien confirmed. Exactly. The body has a clear physical lineage. Ancestors you studied share genetics, but you, the consciousness inhabiting the body, didn't evolve from that lineage. You came from a dimension where monkeys never existed. You chose the human body as a vehicle when it became available. And the alien continued, and this explains anomalies that pure evolution doesn't explain well. Why are humans born so prematurely compared to other mammals? Because the brain needed to grow a lot to be an adequate receiver of complex consciousness, but the head needed to pass through the birth canal. The evolutionary solution was to be born early. The brain finishes development outside the womb, a necessary compromise. Why do only humans have universal spirituality? All peoples, all eras seek the divine, perform rituals, question existence. It's not brain size. It's because the inhabitant of the body is a spiritual being. It brings an inclination of origin. The holographic projection changed again now, showing an object that Rick immediately recognized. An old radio, varnished wood circular, dials a telescopic antenna, the alien said telepathically. An analogy that your scientific mind will understand. Observe carefully. In the immersive projection, the radio was playing music, a clear melody flowing from the speaker. Then an invisible hand picked up a hammer, struck an internal component of the radio. The sound distorted, struck again. The sound stopped completely. Silence. The alien asked, "When the radio stopped playing, did music cease to exist?" Rick replied telepathically, "No, music was on a radio wave transmitted from a distant station. The radio only received and translated the wave into audible sound. Damaging the radio damages reception, not transmission." And the alien said, "Exactly. Now apply that to the brain and consciousness." The projection showed a human brain next to a radio, a clear visual parallel, and the alien narrated, "Consciousness is transmission. It comes from a higher dimension. It exists independently of the body. The brain is a receiver. It captures consciousness and translates it into physical experience. Thoughts, emotions, memories manifested through neurons. When you damage the brain, the projection showed brain damage. The receiver becomes impaired. The connection between consciousness and body weakens or distorts. But consciousness itself remains intact. It just cannot fully express itself through a damaged instrument. Rick, his resistance waning but still present, asked, but in cases of Alzheimer's, personality changes completely. Memories fade. If consciousness is separated, why does brain disease affect so much? And the alien replied, because the expression of consciousness through that brain is compromised. Imagine a virtuoso pianist trying to play on a piano with broken keys. The music in his mind remains perfect, but the instrument doesn't allow for proper execution. An outside observer thinks the pianist has lost skill, but only the instrument has failed. The projection showed a visceral example: an elderly man with Alzheimer's, confused, not recognizing his family. And then at the moment of death, his consciousness leaving his body and suddenly lucid again, recognizing everything, his memories intact because the damaged receptor no longer limited him. Rick recalled cases he had read about Alzheimer's patients having moments of sudden clarity before dying, a phenomenon that medicine called terminal lucidity but did not adequately explain. Alien continued, and this perfectly explains your daughter's experience. Brain-dead cardiac arrest, no electrical activity. Materialism predicts that consciousness should cease entirely, but the opposite happened. She reported expanded consciousness, greater clarity than normal, saw from impossible angles, processed information. Why? Because the receiver shut down, but transmission continued, and without the brain's filter limiting perception to only physical survival. Consciousness experienced a full spectrum, a higher dimension, partially accessible. Rick felt an internal click. It made disturbing sense, explaining anomalies that materialism couldn't. The alien said, the brain doesn't generate consciousness. It filters and focuses consciousness, reducing the infinite spectrum to the narrow band necessary to operate in the physical world. Without a filter, you would be overwhelmed by the amount of information. You wouldn't be able to function. So the brain limits perception to what's necessary: survival, reproduction, social interaction. But when it temporarily shuts down, as in a near-death experience, the filter is removed and consciousness expands. The projection visually showed a wide cone of light representing total consciousness passing through a narrow funnel, representing the brain with only a small fraction of the light passing through. The alien said, this is your consciousness, now vast but filtered. You are much more than you experience through the body. When the body dies permanently, the funnel is removed. The entire cone of light is accessible again. You return to the dimension of origin with a totality of who you are. And eventually, if you choose, you incarnate again in a new body to continue learning. Rick asked, reincarnation, does consciousness inhabit multiple bodies over time? And the alien confirmed, yes, not mandatory, but common. Consciousness learns through varied experiences. One life as a man, another as a woman, one in poverty, another in wealth. Different cultures, eras, challenges. Each incarnation offers unique lessons and some consciousnesses. Very young spiritually still carry memories of previous lives, especially young children, before their brain filter fully solidifies. The projection showed cases of 3 or 4-year-old children describing past lives with verifiable details, names, places, events they couldn't possibly know through normal means. And the alien said, thousands of documented cases. A researcher named Ian Stevenson verified 3,000. If consciousness were born only from this brain in this life, there would be no memories of previous bodies. But there are, because consciousness is continuous, inhabiting body after body. Most forget upon incarnation because forgetting is necessary for the experience to be authentic. But some, especially young ones, still remember fragments before incarnational amnesia is complete. Rick absorbed that his mind, reorganizing decades of certainties. So the body evolved through billions of years on Earth, but the consciousness that inhabits the body comes from another dimension, existed before, continues, and after the body is temporary. Consciousness is eternal, and the alien nodded. Correct. Two parallel journeys, physical and spiritual, meeting and human, and that doesn't negate evolution. Darwin was right about the body, but incomplete about consciousness and religions. We're right about the eternal soul, but incomplete about the origin of the body. Complete truth requires integrating both perspectives. Rick felt final resistance dissolving. But why hasn't science discovered this? Why isn't there evidence? And the alien replied, there is evidence, abundant evidence. You just ignore it because the materialist paradigm discards it a priori. Near-death experiences, millions of global cases, consistent patterns, tunnel of light, life review, encounters with loved ones, lucid consciousness when the brain is dead, reincarnation, thousands of verified cases, evolutionary anomalies that natural selection alone doesn't explain well. Human babies born prematurely, universal spirituality in all cultures. Everything points to non-physical consciousness. But the science you practice rejects evidence because the current scientific method was designed to measure only matter, not dimensional frequencies. And the alien continued, imagine a civilization that only has instruments to measure temperature. They would conclude that light doesn't exist because thermometers don't detect it. But light exists independently of measurement. It just requires the right instrument. Dimensional consciousness exists, but material instruments don't measure it. It needs a direct experience, deep meditation, altered states, near-death experiences, moments where the brain's filter loosens and you perceive beyond the physical. Rick asked, and how does this change our understanding of human origins? The title says, we didn't come from monkeys, but did we and didn't we? And the alien replied, precisely, your body came from an ancestor shared with monkeys, a clear lineage, documented fossils, proven genetics. Darwin explained this perfectly. But you, the consciousness that says, I didn't come from monkeys, you came from a dimension where primates never existed. You chose a human body when it evolved appropriately. So the answer depends on how you define came from. If you're referring to the body, yes, it shares primate ancestry. If you're referring to consciousness, no, a completely different origin. And the final projection showed a complete human body shining in material frequency, consciousness shining in a higher golden frequency, superimposed, integrated. And the alien said, human is this a hybrid being, matter and spirit, temporary and eternal, evolved and incarnate, both true simultaneously. And the next step is to show you specific evidence that science ignores, but that confirms everything I have revealed, ready to see. The holographic projection had changed now, showing compiled data, not immersive images, but structured information that Rick's scientific mind appreciated. And the alien said telepathically, I showed you theory, dual origin, evolved body, plus embodied consciousness. Now evidence that materialistic science ignores or inadequately explains. First sudden behavioral leap. 300,000 years ago, a chart appeared. An evolutionary timeline and an alien-pointed Homo erectus. 500,000 years ago, 900 centimeter brain, simple stone tools, pattern repeated for 1,000,000 years. No art, no ritual, no evidence of existential questioning, purely instinctive behavior. Then a dramatic jump in the timeline. Homo sapiens, 300,000 years ago, 1,400 sounded brain. But change isn't not just size, it's behavior. The projection showed archaeological evidence, elaborate and beautiful cave paintings depicting animals and abstract symbols. And the alien said art appears suddenly, not gradually. Ritual burials with flowers, tools, and ornaments placed with the dead, implying a belief in an afterlife, rapidly developed complex language capacity for abstract symbolism, primitive mathematics, all within a geologically short period. Rick analyzed, but cultural evolution can accelerate. It doesn't have to be gradual like physics. And the alien replied, true, but question why this cultural explosion coincides exactly with the anatomical appearance of Homo sapiens. The brain grew gradually from Homo erectus to Homo sapiens over 1.5 million years, but behavior changed drastically in the last 300,000, as if something beyond biology entered. Dimensional consciousness is incarnating. Explain the perfect timing. A second piece of evidence emerged. Global data on near-death experiences. Millions of cases compiled from different cultures and eras. The alien narrated consistent patterns across geographies and religions. Tunnel of light panoramic review of life. Encounter with deceased loved ones. Feeling of profound peace, reluctant return to the body. If these were hallucinations caused by cerebral hypoxia, as materialistic science claims, why such consistent patterns? Hallucinations are chaotic and individual, but NDEs follow a repeatable structure. Rick saw statistics, medical studies cases where patients reported verifiable details they couldn't possibly know. Conversations in adjacent rooms, objects on top of cabinets, seen from an impossible aerial perspective. And the alien said, famous casewoman during heart surgery had a cardiac arrest. Later reported seeing a specific sneaker shoe on an external window ledge 3 floors above. The team checked the shoe was there exactly as she described, including specific wear and tear. How did she see if she was unconscious on the operating table? Consciousness left the body observed from the outside. Third piece of evidence, cases of reincarnation projection showed compiled research, and an alien said, Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia, investigated 3,000 cases of children remembering past lives. Verified details. A child in India remembers being a merchant in a distant village. Describes family house circumstances of death. A team visits the village, confirms everything. The previous family recognizes details that only the deceased would know. The child's birthmarks correspond to fatal injuries from a previous life. How does materialism explain this? Rick, ever skeptical, asked fraud parents encouraging children to invent things for attention, and the alien replied, Stephenson rigorously verified cases where a child was 2 or 3 years old, not exposed to information about a deceased person, spoke a language they had never learned. Xenoglossia. An American boy speaking Old Swedish fluently when describing a previous life in Sweden never studied Swedish. The family has no connection to Scandinavia. Recorded linguists confirm the specific dialectal authenticity of the 18th century, not explainable by fraud or childhood fantasy. Fourth piece of evidence, specific evolutionary anomalies in alien research showed human babies are born extremely prematurely compared to other mammals. AF walks minutes after birth. A human baby takes a whole year totally dependent. Why evolutionary pressure should favor more developed babies at birth, but humans are exceptionally vulnerable. The standard explanation is large heads, but there's more to it. The projection showed brain development, and the alien continued. The human brain needs to grow a lot to be a suitable receiver of complex consciousnesses coming from a higher dimension. But the head needs to go through the birth canal, anatomical limitation. The evolutionary solution was a compromise to be born with a brain only 25% developed to complete growth in the first years of life. A biologically risky compromise, but necessary to host dimensional consciousness. On fifth piece of evidence, universal spirituality, and the alien said all peoples, all eras, all cultures develop spirituality independently. Belief in something beyond the physical rituals to connect with the divine, the concept of a soul. Why primates don't have this? Elephants have large brains. They mourn the dead, but they don't build temples. They don't pray. They don't question origins. Only humans do this universally. Why Rick thought? Cultural evolution, the need to explain, natural phenomena before science. And the alien replied, but science has existed for centuries and spirituality persists even in scientists. Research shows that 70% of elite physicists believe in a higher power or cosmic intelligence. It's not ignorance. It's a deep intuition that the consciousness they inhabit is not a product of random atoms. They recognize, consciously or unconsciously, a dimensional origin. An alien showed the latest evidence: extreme brain plasticity, cases of hemispherectomy, surgical removal of half the brain in children with severe epilepsy. An alien said after surgery, the child develops normally. The remaining half of the brain and assumes the functions of both halves. Personality remains intact. Memories are preserved. Consciousness continues. If consciousness were generated by specific neurons, removing half should destroy half the person, but it doesn't. Why? Because consciousness is not in neurons. It is through them, using whatever is available. Rick absorbed evidence, each piece individually explainable by materialism with effort, but the complete set created a pattern. And the alien said, no single piece of evidence conclusively proves the dimensional origin of consciousness, but all together they point in the same direction. Sudden behavioral leaps, NDEs with consistent patterns, verifiable reincarnation, evolutionary anomalies, universal spirituality, extreme brain plasticity, all suggest that consciousness is not an emergence from matter, but a temporary inhabitant using matter as a vehicle. Rick felt decades of materialistic certainty crumbling not with anger, but with a strange relief. So my daughter really left her body. It wasn't a hallucination. And the alien confirmed it was real. She briefly experienced what everyone experiences permanently in death, a return to the dimension of origin. And she came back changed because she touched a truth that materialism denies: the continuity of consciousness. And that truth is available to you now, Richard, not as belief, but as knowledge. You saw evidence. You understood the mechanism. It only remains to decide whether you integrate this into your worldview or resist out of loyalty to the paradigm that has defined you for 30 years. Rick remained silent for a long time, processing, and finally asked, if I accept this, what changes? How do I teach evolution now? How do I reconcile Darwin with spiritual dimensions? And the alien replied, you don't abandon Darwin, you expand on it. The body evolved exactly as you teach, but you add a second layer: incarnated consciousness. Both true, both necessary to explain the complete human. And students will respond deeply because it finally reconciles the science they learn with the spiritual intuitions they feel. Ready to see how this transforms not only teaching, but life. Rick returned to the car on the mountain road. Dawn beginning to brighten the horizon. Sitting in the driver's seat in absolute silence, his hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from cognitive overload. Decades of certainties rearranged into hours, and the engine started normally as if it had never stopped. But he was different, completely different, not externally, but internally. Something fundamental had changed in the way he saw reality. He drove back to Boulder in an altered state, not shocked, but expanded. And arriving home, he couldn't sleep. He sat in his office surrounded by evolutionary biology books he had written and studied for 30 years. And they were all still true. Fossils were real. Genetics was solid. Natural selection explained the body magnificently, but incompletely half the story. And for the first time, he felt not contradiction, but expansion. Darwin and spiritual dimensions were not opposites. They were complementary. The following weeks were strange. Rick continued teaching, normally teaching evolution, as he always had: mutation mechanisms, selective pressure, common ancestry. But something subtly changed. After explaining how Homo sapiens evolved anatomically, he would pause and add, and for 500,000 years we've had this magnificent brain. But 300,000 years ago, something else happened. Behavior changed drastically. Art appeared, spiritual rituals, complex language, profound self-awareness. Physical evolution doesn't completely explain the speed of this behavioral change. There's something beyond biology operating here. Some students looked confused, others with shining eyes. Finally, the professor connecting dots they intuited, but no one verbalized. And after class, a 20-year-old Amanda approached. Professor Coleman, what did you mean by something beyond biology? Are you talking about non-physical consciousness? And Rick, who would have previously dodged or denied it, now answered, honestly, I am suggesting that complete human origin requires looking in two directions: the evolution of the body, which science documents well, and the origin of consciousness, which materialistic science ignores, both necessary. And Amanda, her eyes moist, said, thank you. I always felt that science and spirituality shouldn't be enemies, but nobody teaches integration. And Rick realized he was making a difference, not despite adding a spiritual dimension, but because of it. Students responded deeply when the whole truth was presented, but not everyone responded positively. A colleague from the department, Dr. Stevens, a rigid materialist, confronted Rick in the hallway. I heard you're talking about non-physical consciousness in class. That's pseudoscience. It compromises the department's reputation. Evolution is a material process, period. Rick, who had initially backed down for fear of academic criticism, now calmly replied, evolution is a material process that explains the body. I completely agree. But consciousness that observes evolution, that questions its own origin. Where does it come from? Neuroscience doesn't adequately answer that. Near-death experiences suggest continuity beyond the brain. Ignoring evidence out of loyalty to a paradigm isn't science, it's dogma. Stevens left angrily, and Rick knew there would be consequences. But inner peace was greater than the fear of academic rejection. And the most important consequence happened that night, having dinner with Sarah, his daughter, who 3 months earlier had experienced a near-death experience. And Rick, for the first time since the accident, said honestly, Sarah, about what you experienced when your heart stopped, I dismissed it as a hallucination. I rationalized it, but I was wrong. It was real. You really left your body. Consciousness continues when the brain stops. And I'm sorry for invalidating your experience. Sarah looked surprised, tears welling up. Dad, do you believe me now? And Rick nodded, his own eyes moist. I believe you and more. I understand now. You touch the dimension from where we truly came, not from this body, but through it. And you return because you still have a purpose here. Lessons to learn, but death is not the end. It's a return. And Sarah stood up, hugged her father tightly. I tried to tell you, but you wouldn't listen. You always had a scientific explanation. I thought you thought I was crazy. And Rick held his daughter. She wasn't crazy. She was right. And I was blind. 30 years teaching half the truth. The body evolved, but consciousness incarnated. Both necessary to understand the complete human being, and the relationship between them strained since the accident. Healed that night not through arguments, but through validation. Father finally recognizing his daughter's experience as real. In the following months, Rick continued teaching, but differently. He didn't abandon science. He expanded upon it, showing fossils, explaining genetics, meticulously documenting physical evolution, but adding a layer. The body shares ancestry with chimpanzees. 98.8% identical DNA because the lineage is common. But you, the consciousnesses that inhabit these bodies, did not evolve from primates. You came from another dimension. You chose to incarnate when the biological vehicle became suitable. So the answer to where did we come from depends on whether you are asking about the body or about consciousness. And students, especially young people seeking meaning beyond materialism, responded intensely. Course evaluations improved not despite spiritual integration, but because of it. And Rick realized he was doing what Alien had suggested, reconciling science and spirituality, not as opposites, but as complementary perspectives of a greater reality. Internally, the changes were profound. The fear of death that she had subconsciously carried for 58 years dissolved. If consciousness continues, death is transition, not an end. And life gained a purpose it previously lacked. It was not a cosmic accident awaiting extinction. It was a school, an experience chosen by eternal consciousness for accelerated growth. The suffering she had experienced, the loss of her father years ago, a painful divorce were not punishments, but lessons, challenges that her soul had chosen for evolution. And compassion grew. He looked at people on the street and saw not just bodies competing for resources as social Darwinism suggested, but eternal consciousnesses learning through varied experiences. The homeless person on the corner was not an evolutionary failure, but a soul going through a specific lesson that Rick didn't understand but respected. The annoying colleague in the department was not an enemy, but a fellow traveler expressing a different stage of development. A year after his encounter with the alien, Rick was at a scientific conference, the same event where he had defended materialistic evolution the previous year. But this time he presented a controversial paper, Dual Human Origin, Integrating Physical Evolution and Conscious Incarnation, and the room was divided. Half the scientists left offended, half remained fascinated. And in the debates that followed, Rick did not argue aggressively as before, but only presented evidence near-death experiences, verified cases of reincarnation, anomalies that materialism did not explain well, and planted seeds. Driving back from the conference along the same road where he had been abducted years before, Rick looked at the starry sky through the windshield and thought, hoping the alien was still monitoring him somehow. Thank you for showing me the whole truth, for not letting me die believing half the story. I'm living differently now, teaching differently, and it's making a difference. He didn't receive a telepathic response, but he felt it. Not imagination, but deep certainty that the alien knew and approved. 3 years after that impossible encounter on the mountain road, Damn. Richard Coleman was on the stage of a packed university auditorium, not in Boulder, but at an international conference on consciousness and science, presenting not as a marginalized professor, but as a respected pioneer in the emerging field of integrating physical evolution and the spiritual origin of consciousness. And he told an audience of scientists, philosophers, and spiritual seekers, for 30 years, I taught that humans evolved from primate ancestors through natural selection, and I was correct. The body shares 98.8% of DNA with chimpanzees because we shared a common ancestor 7 million years ago. Fossils clearly document lineage. Darwin explained mechanisms perfectly. Pause, looking at the audience. But it was incomplete because it focused only on the body, ignoring consciousness. And consciousness, that which we truly are, did not evolve from primates. It was not born from neurons. It comes from a dimension that exists parallel to this one, but at a frequency that material instruments cannot measure. It existed before Earth had life, and it chose to incarnate when the human body evolved adequately 300,000 years ago. A fusion between matter and spirit, temporary and eternal, evolved and incarnated. And applause followed, not unanimous, because some scientists still resisted, but substantial. And in the following years, Rick published a book that became a reference, Dual Origins, Reconciling Darwin and Dimensions. Not a mass bestseller, but essential reading in circles that sought integration between science and spirituality. And emails arrived weekly. Professor Coleman, your approach has changed my life. I can finally love science and accept that I am more than just a body. His relationship with Sarah blossomed. She now studying transpersonal psychology, focusing on near-death experiences, and they work together occasionally. Father bringing scientific rigor, daughter bringing spiritual sensitivity. And Rick recognized if it weren't for her experience, he would never have questioned materialism. Never been open when the alien came. Everything connected. Synchronicity, not coincidence. Internally, Rick was living differently. The death of a close friend the previous year, which would have devastated him, now brought peace mixed with longing. He returned to his original dimension. He will continue his journey. Perhaps we will meet again in a future life. And daily decisions changed. He no longer obsessively accumulated possessions because he knew that the body was temporary. He no longer competed aggressively because he recognized everyone as eternal consciousness is learning. He lived with a clear purpose. Each experience, good or difficult, was a lesson chosen by his soul for growth. And now, years after writing this story, I want to speak directly to you, the viewer. Because if you've made it this far, if Rick's story resonated with you, if you also question where consciousness truly comes from, if intuition tells you that we are more than just evolved bodies, then the truth that Rick discovered is available to you as well. The truth about our origin. Rick spent 30 years teaching that you are a cosmic accident, random atoms arranged by natural selection, consciousness emerging from neurons with no purpose beyond survival dying and returning to nothingness. And some of that is true. Your body has truly evolved over billions of years on this planet. It shares ancestors with all forms of life. It carries DNA from primates, reptiles, fish, and single-celled organisms that swam in primordial oceans. But that's just the history of the vehicle, not the drivers. The story of where his body came from, not where you came from. And there is a monumental difference between the two. When you look in the mirror, you don't just see flesh that has evolved. See eyes that question, a mind that seeks meaning, a heart that yearns for something beyond mere survival. Primates don't do that. The animal eats, reproduces, and dies. It doesn't question why, but you question it. Why not because your brain is bigger? Elephants have larger brains and don't write poetry. Whales have more neurons and don't build temples. You question why the inhabitant of your body is not of this world. You are a returning visitor. Alien revealed to Rick what all spiritual traditions have always known, but science has forgotten. Before there was Earth, you already existed. Not in this body, not in this form, but like a spark of consciousness in a dimension of pure light. No pain, no separation, no death, only love, peace, unity. And in that state of perfection, you were stagnant. It wasn't growing, it wasn't evolving because there was no challenge. There was no real choice, there was no forgetting followed by remembering. Then you looked down. He saw a blue planet developing life. He saw the body evolving through eons, primates with growing brains, nervous system, becoming more complex, and he acknowledged opportunity, suitable vehicle, intense school, rapid growth. You chose to go down. He was not forced. He was not punished. He was not exiled. You chose it. He chose to forget who he was in order to rediscover himself. He chose limitation in order to learn about infinity. He chose pain in order to understand compassion. He chose death to understand eternity. She chose this body, this life, these specific challenges. So where did you come from? Your body came from the earth. It evolved from ancestors that swam, crawled, and ran. But you, the consciousness, reading these words came from a home you forgot. A dimension where there is no body, but there is you. Where there is no time, but there is eternity. Where there is no separation, but there is individuality. And when this body dies, you don't die. Just take off any tight clothes, returning home temporarily, review lessons learned, plan your next incarnation, and eventually, if you choose, you can go down again. New body, new life, new challenges, because there is still growth available. What does this change all? If you are only a body, death is terror. Life is a desperate competition. Suffering is cruel injustice. But what if you are eternal consciousness choosing human experience? Death is transition. Life is school. Suffering is a lesson. Nothing that happens is an accident. He wasn't born into this family by chance. These challenges are not a matter of bad luck. You are not feeling these pains as punishment. Alma chose everything before incarnating. Not because I wanted to suffer, but because I wanted to grow. And growth comes through overcoming, not through avoidance. Rick understood this when the alien showed him and his life changed. Not because problems have disappeared, but why did meaning appear? Pain that was once meaningless was now a lesson. Difficult relationships were now mirrored. The death of loved ones was now a temporary return to one's origins, not a permanent loss. And guilt for failures dissolved because it wasn't a failure. It was a curriculum chosen by a courageous soul. You always knew that this is not new information. It's a memory. If this story stirred an old memory, if it recognized that it is more than flesh waiting to be extinguished, if the soul whispered, yes, I always knew, get to know our book, reconnecting with your divine essence. It's for those who are ready for looking inward instead of searching outside. Discovering that all the answers, all the power, all the wisdom already reside within you, waiting to be accessed. Reconnecting with forgotten, divine essence, an eternal core beyond temporary identities, traumas, and conditioning that obscure who one truly is. Break through the veil of illusion that separates you from your truth, dissolving layers of programming that made you forget your divine nature. Establish a direct connection with the Creator, not through intermediaries or external dogmas, but through the divinity that has always existed within. Dissolving deeply ingrained limiting beliefs that keep you small, dependent, disconnected from your unlimited inner potential. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell icon because every week we share stories that awaken dormant memories, reconnect with forgotten origins, and reveal truths that the soul recognizes even when the mind doubts. Leave a comment. Do you feel like you're just a temporary visitor in this world? Have you ever had a moment when you remembered that you are more than just a body? Did this story awaken something deep within you that you can't quite explain? Tell us about it. We love reading your comments. If you want to support our channel, become a member or leave your contribution with a stamp. It was totally worth it. Each act of support allows us to continue sharing truths that the soul recognizes. Some of you are feeling a call. It's not intellectual curiosity. It is an urgency of the soul. Something has awakened that will not go back to sleep. An awakening that has begun but needs guidance to fully blossom. If this calling is undeniable, if you feel the time has come to cross the veil with accompaniment, you can schedule a private consultation with one of our spiritual therapists via the email address in the description. Professionals trained to facilitate your unique awakening. Every journey is different. Every soul has its own timing. Remember, you are not here by chance. Something in this story was meant for you, specifically for you. Perhaps the confirmation he was looking for. Perhaps the calling he finally heard. Or perhaps it's just the seed planted today that will germinate tomorrow. It doesn't matter what happened. What matters is that you made it this far, and that's all. Until the next story.